If you're standing all day and your feet are tired, sore, or aching by the end of your shift, there's a good chance that it's not your job, it's your shoes. And the worst part is, most people are choosing the exact wrong type without even realizing, because the shoes that feel great for walking often don't work when you're standing still all day. And the shoes that feel most comfortable in the shop are usually the first to break down after a few hours. So by the end of the day, instead of supporting your feet, they're actually increasing the load going through them. And that's why in this video I'm going to show you the best shoes for standing all day, and also 3 types of shoes I see causing problems over and over again. So before we get into the best options, let's start with the shoes that are likely making your feet worse. First, heavily rockered shoes. Now these are great for running because they help roll you forward and improve efficiency. But standing all day is a completely different demand on your feet. When you're standing all day, what your feet actually need is a broad, level base. But with a very aggressive rocker, you're slightly tipped forward and backward. And that means your muscles are constantly working to keep you balanced while you're standing in these types of shoes. It's subtle, but over an 8 to 10 hour shift, that constant micro adjustment can lead to fatigue. And a lot of people don't realize this because the shoe feels so comfortable at first. The next mistake is wearing very rigid arch support. This is one of the biggest misconceptions that I see. People assume that more support automatically means more comfort, but that's not always the case. If the arch support is too aggressive, or it doesn't match the shape of your foot, it can actually increase the amount of pressure under the arch of your foot rather than relieving it. And over time, that can lead to irritation, soreness, and even more discomfort than before. So while some people benefit from more support, it has to be the right type. And finally, old running shoes. This is probably the most common mistake that I see. Most people finish with their running shoes and then just turn them into work shoes. But over time, that midsole starts to break down. The cushioning wears out unevenly, it becomes firmer, and you lose that shock absorption completely. So rather than having a consistent, stable base, you're standing on something that's worn and unstable. And that means that your feet are working harder all day to compensate. So with those mistakes in mind, let's focus on what the best types of shoes are for your feet. If you want the safest all-round option for standing all day, this is probably it. The Glycerin Max 3 sits in that sweet spot between cushioning and stability. So it feels protective underfoot, but still solid enough to stay comfortable over a long shift. It has a slightly firmer midsole, which means you don't sink into it too much like you do in softer shoes. But at the same time, there's still enough cushioning there to keep you comfortable throughout the entire day. It has a wide, fairly flat base underneath your foot. And that's really important when you're standing because it gives you a more even distribution of force across your foot rather than tipping you forward and backward. So instead of your muscles constantly working to keep you balanced, you're just more stable and supported throughout the day. And things like sidewall support, the fairly rigid heel canter, and that broad base underfoot all help to reduce fatigue over time because you're not constantly having to stabilize yourself. Compared to softer, more rockered shoes, this just feels more consistent from the start of your shift right to the end. It's also one of the most orthotic friendly options on the market. So if you use insoles, this works really well without them sinking into the foam. Now it's not the lightest shoe, and it's definitely not the most stylish, but if the goal is to simply get through a full day on your feet comfortably, this is probably the safest and most reliable option for most people. However, if you want something a bit softer and more premium underfoot, the Brooks Glycerin Max 2 is a really strong option. Compared to the Glycerin Max, this gives you a bit more cushioning and a bit more bounce, so it feels more plush when you're standing or moving around during the day. But importantly, it's not overly soft. The foam holds its shape well, so you don't get that sinking feeling after a few hours like you do with softer lifestyle shoes. So you're getting that extra comfort without losing the support you need for longer shifts. This works particularly well if you're not just standing in one place, but doing a bit more walking throughout the day. Or if you tried firmer shoes and you've just found that they're too harsh underfoot. The trade-off is that it's a little bit less stable than something like the Glycerin Max 3. So if your priority is stability, then that's still the better option. But if you want something that feels softer and a bit more cushioned, and just a little bit more premium overall, this has a really nice setup. Now, if you're standing on hard surfaces like concrete, hospital floors, or retail environments, this is where the Hoka Bondi 9 really stands out. It has a very high stack of cushioning, which helps absorb impact impact and reduce the load going through your feet over time. And that becomes really important when you're standing on hard ground, because there's no natural give coming up from the surface. But what makes this different from a lot of softer shoes is that it still has a wide, stable base underneath you. So even with all that cushioning, it doesn't feel overly unstable or wobbly when you're standing in one place. What you end up with is a shoe that takes a lot of pressure off your feet while still giving you enough structure to get through a long shift. And if you need something more work specific, there's also the Bondi SR version, which has a more slip resistant outsole, so that can be a better option if you work in environments like hospitality or hospitals where grip and durability are more important underfoot. The trade-off of having that extra slip resistance is that it makes the cushioning a little bit firmer than the traditional Bondi 9. But if your main aim is to reduce fatigue on hard surfaces, the Bondi is one of the best shoes on the market. Now, if you notice your arches getting tired by the end of the day, or your feet start to roll in more as the day goes on, then a stability shoe like the Brooks Adrenaline GTS 25 can help. It uses something called guide rails, which are designed to control excess movement without being overly aggressive. And the big difference here is that instead of having a firm piece of arch support pressing into your foot, it works more around your heel and your ankle to guide movement. So it feels less intrusive, while still giving you that subtle support that you might need. And what that does over time is reduce the amount of strain going through your arch and ankle. It also has a slightly higher drop, which can take a bit of pressure off your calves and Achilles when you're on your feet all day. The downside of this is that it can put a little bit more pressure to the front of your foot when you're standing for long periods. So if you're someone that already gets discomfort in the forefoot, that's something to be aware of with the Adrenaline. But this is important. It's a shoe that I only recommend if you actually need extra support, because if your foot doesn't actually need it, it can begin to feel a little bit restrictive, especially when worn over long periods. So this is a really good option if you need a little bit of guidance, whereas the Glycerin Max 3 works as a good stable neutral alternative. Interestingly, one of the biggest issues I see in clinic is people wearing shoes that are simply too narrow, and that's where something like the Altra Experience Flow 3 works really well. It has a wider, foot-shaped toe box, which gives your toes space to spread more naturally, and that's really important, because it helps to reduce pressure to the front of your foot over time. So instead of everything being compressed together, you're allowing the load to spread more evenly across these joints. It also has a slightly lower drop. That's the difference in height from the back to the front of the shoe, which helps to distribute pressure more evenly across the whole foot rather than shifting it forward. So compared to some higher drop shoes, this can feel a bit more balanced when you're standing for longer periods of time. One thing to be aware of though, the forefoot is wide, but the midfoot is relatively snug. So this works really well if you have a wider forefoot, but not necessarily if the whole foot is wide. If you do need more space throughout the entire shoe, again the Glycerin Max 3 does an excellent job at this. Now the Experience Flow 3 has the least amount of cushioning of all the shoes that I'm going to recommend to you today. So if you're used to wearing a max cushion shoe, this might feel a little bit firmer underfoot at first. It's also a little less structured than some other options, so if you prefer a more stable, supportive feel, that's something to keep in mind. But if you feel cramped in most shoes, or you tend to get pressure through your forefoot, this is a really good option to consider. And if you want something that feels more structured and controlled underfoot, the Hoka Gaviota 6 is a really good option. This is Hoka's premium stability shoe, but compared to something like the Bondi or the Glycerin, it's noticeably firmer and more stable. That's mainly down to the H-frame system, which gives you a much more structured platform through the midfoot and heel. So instead of the midsole compressing and softening underfoot, your foot feels more centered and supported throughout the whole day. It has a slightly flatter base and less aggressive rocker, so it makes you feel stable when you're standing for long periods without tipping you back or forth. So this works really well if you like that more controlled, planted feel, especially if your feet tend to feel tired or unstable by the end of the day. The trade-off is that it's definitely firmer and less plush than some other options, so it doesn't have that same soft, relaxing feel underfoot. And the fit is slightly more snug in the forefoot compared to the Gaviota 5. So if you prefer a roomier toe box, you might consider getting the wide option of this shoe. So if you want a stable shoe without that invasive arch support that gives you nice structure and stability throughout the whole day, the Gaviota 6 is an excellent option. So just to quickly summarize, depending on what you need, if you want the best overall balance for most people, the Glycerin Max 3. If you prefer something softer and more premium underfoot, the Glycerin Max 2. If you're standing on hard floors for long shifts, the Bondi 9. If you need a bit more support through the arch and a higher drop, the Adrenaline GTS 25. If you want more space for your toes or have a wider forefoot, the Altra Experience Flow 3. If you want something more structured and controlled underfoot, the Gaviota 6. So instead of trying to find one perfect shoe, it's really about finding the right type for your foot and your situation. And if you want to stay up to date with the latest shoes, I send out a monthly newsletter with new reviews, new releases, and the latest shoes that are on sale at that moment. You can sign up in the description below. Otherwise, as normal, all the shoes that I discussed today are linked in the description if you want to check out the latest price on Amazon. If you watch the channel regularly and you haven't subscribed, please do, as there's a single thing you can do for free that makes the biggest difference to the channel. Otherwise, thank you very much once again for tuning in. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section below.